Okay, welcome back everyone to this session. We have three interesting presentations before the lunch break, and I'm going to say one more thing on how this works. I'm going to indicate a 2-minute sign, as we just did again for the speaker, so you know that you have to finish within 2 minutes if you want to have any time for questions. Okay, so if I give the sign, that means 2 minutes left. Now the first talk is by Martijn van Gils, and the title of his talk is Towards a Legal Strategy Fitting Today's Challenge of Reducing Impact of Subsidence in the Netherlands. Martijn?
So yeah, let's just jump. Well, first let's introduce myself. I'm Martijn. I'm a PhD student at Utrecht University. I'm a lawyer, an environmental lawyer, and my PhD is focused on the topic of soil subsidence and the effects thereof. So yeah, I'm not gonna elaborate really on the effects and the mechanisms of soil subsidence. We've already heard that this morning. I think most important is also from a legal point of view that there's a clear distinction between the urban area and the rural area, both in terms of the mechanisms and the effects. So that also has an impact on the legal consequences of that. And what's also quite important, I think, is that soil subsidence is in many respects actually not the main problem. The main problem are more the effects thereof, especially in the rural area, which we'll talk about later. And maybe also important to note is that the possibility for a more transformative change is quite different if you compare the rural area to the urban area. Like the urban area we talked about this morning, the only real option is actually to relocate in many ways. For existing urban areas, there's not much transformation really possible. But for rural areas and also for newly built up areas, there is a real possibility. So I think that's also an important distinction. So first, I want to give a broad overview. I think most of you don't know this, but there are quite some legal obligations actually concerning peatlands and concerning soil subsidence and oxidation and greenhouse gas emissions. And the most important one is the regulation on land use change and forestry of the European Union. And here we already see the multi-layered legal order that exists in the Netherlands we see coming to light, because now we're talking about European regulations, then we'll later talk about national regulations, then we talk about the decentralized regulations. So you see that there's a multi-layered legal order that also has effect on how to deal with environmental challenges. So this regulation, it's actually part of a broader package of regulations within the European Union about how to curb greenhouse gas emissions in Europe. And this one is particularly focused on curbing emissions from land use and land use change. And that, of course, also means peatlands and agricultural use. And in the Netherlands, that's almost 100%. So the main goal for the period 2021-2030 is actually to make sure that there is sort of net zero of emissions. This is quite hard to achieve in peatlands because, of course, now they are emitting quite some CO2, and to really stop that would require quite some policy changes. That's also not necessary because there are possibilities to compensate. So you could compensate by building forests, you could compensate between member states. Like, for instance, the Scandinavian member states have quite some forests, so you could make a deal there. So it doesn't really necessarily mean that we have to curb emissions from peatlands substantially within a few years, but it does mean that something has to happen, especially when we look at the ever stricter European regulations on climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. I already mentioned it a bit, like the problem of soil subsidence also, of course, the most problematic are in many respects the effects thereof and not so much the subsidence itself. And we also see that in the legal obligations. So you could say like the Habitats and Birds Directive are much more general, serve a much more general purpose, namely to protect species and habitats in Europe. But this could also have some effects on the situation in peatlands, because like the grutto and many other peat meadow birds, they live there, they are protected, but they are affected by the situation that's nowadays happening in peatlands. So What you see, for instance, that's the nature conservation areas, they have quite a higher elevation than the surrounding agricultural land, because that's drained and that's lowers, and therefore the groundwater sort of flows out. So that has effects for the birds and the other species living there. And in a general sense, drier agriculture peatlands also affect birds, also outside of nature protection areas. So although the Habitats and Birds Directive have nothing directly to do with peatlands, you see that they could also have consequences for them and could require member states, in this case Netherlands, to do something about it. And then finally, there's a proposal for a nature restoration law, and that's quite, if this would really go into effect, so this is still a proposal, this would have quite some implications, because it states that restoration measures have to be taken for drained peatlands, and in 2030, at least 30% of the measures should be rewetting. Well, that's quite a, well, we don't know exactly what rewetting means, but this really goes into effect. This has quite big implications, especially because the goal for 2030 is 50%, 2050 would be 70%. So that would really mean quite some transformative change in Dutch peatlands. Then also on the national level, there are some obligations. So first we have the Dutch Climate Act, which states that we need a reduction of 49% of greenhouse gas emissions in 2030, and we need 95% reductions in 2050. Well, if you consider that peatlands contribute to around 2 to 4% of annual emissions, that would mean that if we do nothing about it in 2050, almost all the remaining emissions that are still allowed would be taken up by peatlands. So that would be quite a big deal. So we need to do something about it. And in the National Climate Agreement, which is not really a legal act, but more sort of agreements between companies and different governments how to do something about soil subsidence, an agreement has been reached to curb the emissions of greenhouse gases from peatlands with 1 megaton in 2030. This is not an extreme amount, but it's still quite something, and it would really require some changes and some rewetting of peatlands. So the idea is now that this has been agreed on the national level, and that provinces now draft programs. Some already made them, others are still in the process of making them, on how to do this. And of course, there the proof is in the pudding, because you can set a goal, but then you have to implement it. So we have to wait and see how that works out. This is an overview of well, what you can do, and this to reduce drainage and peat oxidation. And this is first like the overview of water management. So in general, you could say you need 2 policy domains that are really involved. We have water management, and we have land use and spatial planning. First, for water management, the most important, the measures, probably all know this, the idea is eventually to re-wet. And we can do that, well, by raising surface water levels, and we could also do that by installing some drainage systems or a combination of those. But how to effectuate those measures, we also need some legal instruments. And the most important of them is the water level decision. In Dutch, that's called a peilbesluit. And most areas, well, most of the peatlands in the Netherlands are very low lying, and that also means that we can maintain the water levels there quite well. And we also do that. We also do it, and we have legal instruments to do so, in which the precise water level that should be maintained at all times actually is established. Of course, if there's heavy rainfall or something like that, you can still deviate from it. But the idea is that in general, like a particular surface water level should be maintained. And also all the technical installations, so the pumps, etc., all adjusted to this. And there also most change can be achieved, because now they are set at a level that's quite low, so that agricultural production can still go on. But the idea is then to raise the water levels and to amend the water level decisions to do so. Well, this is quite technical. We don't have to go through everything, but that's general the idea. And what you can do is you can amend the water level decisions. Another important option is to fixate the existing water level, and that means that you do not really have to legally amend the decision, but you can just keep it on the level where it is. And And for the construction of the drainage systems and infiltration systems, you could also like require a permit for it or things like that. So that's the first kind of measure that's quite important. And important to notice as well is that we have a sort of specially dedicated public authority to do this. So that's the Regional Water Authority, het waterschap. It is, so we have 12 provinces in the Netherlands and we have 21, I think, regional water authorities. So there are sort of regional governments. And the special thing is that they only do water-related things. And that's, on the one hand, that's an advantage, but on the other hand, that's a disadvantage, and I will come to that in a minute. So what can you do in terms of spatial planning and land use? Well, you see that water level and spatial planning, they have to accompany each other. So you could say, okay, we're going to raise the water levels, but if then existing agricultural use is no longer possible, well, that's a problem, and you have to accommodate for that, and you have to coordinate it between different governments. So if you want to do that, you also need measures in terms of spatial planning. And then what can you do? You can restrict certain uses of agricultural land. You can also prescribe certain types of agricultural land, like wetter crops, like cranberries or things like that. Or prescribe rules in such a way that current agricultural use is extensified. And the third option, the most extreme option, would be really to assign a different function to existing agricultural land. So in places where the soil subsidence is really detrimental or has really big implications for surrounding areas or whatever, you can say, okay, this area has to be changed from agricultural land to, for instance, a nature conservation area. However, this is very costly because, of course, you cannot just say, okay, this land is no longer agriculture and we'll just give it to nature. No, because a farmer is operating there or someone's living there, so you need to compensate them, buy them out, or if that's really not an option, you even would have to expropriate them, which would be really more expensive. So it's possible, but it's all quite expensive. And also for the other measures, like prescribing current agricultural use or restricting use, you also need a form of compensation, because you can't just say to a farmer, okay, you have to change overnight. So here we come to the main problem, I think, in order to come to an effective approach to dealing with reducing drainage and tackling soil subsidence, because we see a fragmentation in the legal system. On the one hand, we see that in terms of water management, regional water authorities are in charge, and they have to take the water level decisions, and they could decide to raise them or to fixate them. But on the other hand, we see that land use and spatial planning is something that is done by municipalities and by provinces. I'll just go on. So how to make sure that they work together? Because you need both of them. You need both land use and spatial planning in order to create an effective, to deal effectively with climate change. So this, I would say it's also a symptom of a bigger problem, that the environment is integrated, you could say, like all different effects, all different mechanisms are bound together. But on the other hand, the government system is very sectoral. So it's all organized in different sectors, also so both vertically in terms of policy domains, but also horizontally in terms of the European Union, national government, provinces, regional water authorities, municipalities. So what to do to accommodate it? Yeah, this was the picture I was waiting for, because this is, I think, where the answer lies. So we see this fragmentation in the legal system, and we see that it doesn't really work in an integrated environment where causes and solutions to environmental problems really are bound together. So you see that different governments, like you could say, there are different cogs in the same system. And if they, so they could work against each other, and that could really frustrate the system. But if you make sure that they all turn in the same direction, you make sure that the system works and that we can actually effectively deal with problems such as soil subsidence. And there are already many legal mechanisms to do this. And I think the most important thing is steering from the national government. Because I also heard it in the previous presentation, I thought, at some point, like, who's responsible? Is there a sort of objective to deal with soil subsidence? And I think this is one of the main problems. So as soon as we have a certain objective, so you could say this 1 megaton in the National Climate Agreement is such an objective, then these cogs start turning in the same direction, because all decentralized governments, so provinces, municipalities, and regional water authorities, have to make sure that they achieve this objective set by the national government. So that's the most important. And the second one, you also need to align those policies. And therefore, the most important thing, I think, is to make sure that land use actually, that you first decide what you want to do about land use, and then the water management can follow. And there, the regional water authority has a difficult position, because they are only concerned with water issues. They might not look further than that and would not consider land use. So I think it's very important that provinces and municipalities take the lead on how to really deal with this problem on a more strategic level, and then water management can follow. So that's my presentation.
Okay, thank you, Martijn, for this interesting view from a legal perspective on land subsidence. It's maybe a first for the TISOLS conferences that we have this, but it's really worthwhile. Any questions from the audience? Yeah. Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, I know.
We already saw a picture with a nice lock-in. I think you presented that. Do you feel your recommendations are capable of solving this lock-in, overcoming the lock-in?
Yeah, I actually think it is possible, because I think we saw that there actually was a kind of lock-in, because for 1,000 years we have been doing the same thing, like draining, and the soil subsides, and then we're in this vicious cycle, which Gilles also had a nice picture of this spiral. And now we're trying to break the spiral, and I think actually legal framework accommodates for this. But the problem is, I think regional water authorities cannot do it alone. They need changes in land use, and those need to come from, I think, either the provinces or the national government. So I think it is possible to do something about it, but then we need steering on a higher level, I think.
Any further questions? There are 3 people from the water board here in front, so you're being addressed, Tim.
You showed us also some new EU legislation for nature purposes, and can you tell us a bit more about that? It says 70% of the peat pastures in the Netherlands will have to be re-wetted in something like 30 years, and already 30% in 2030. Is this already in function?
No. So it's a proposal, and yeah. So I don't know whether it will be implemented, but I think it would be quite drastic, you could say. So I'm not sure, like, a country as the Netherlands would agree with this, but maybe for other countries the problem would be not as big. So we'll have to wait and see.
And if we don't agree, is there anything that we can do about it? Because at some point the European Union is going to decide anyway, right?
Yeah, I mean, then we probably have to implement it. But yeah, we see the same with nitrogen. That's we are not really willing to do so. But
right.
That's the nuclear option.
I'm giving the last question to Roel.
Thanks. Interesting presentation. I was wondering, is there any role for groundwater in this legal framework you were talking about? So you're mainly talking about surface water management, but in the end, it's the groundwater level that really determines the amount of oxidation and land subsidence. And that's of course much harder to control, but in a dry summer, even with a higher surface water level, you may still have low groundwater levels.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the point, because it's hard to control. It is legally possible actually to establish water level decisions for groundwater bodies, but I think because it's so hard to control, that it's never done in practice. So that's the first problem. And the second problem is there is a sort of duty of care for groundwater, but that's only in urban areas. So in rural areas, because it's also like it's private property actually, there's not like a duty of care for a government to do something about it. So they could establish these water level decisions, but I'm not sure they will do so.
Okay, thank you very much, Martijn. Thanks again for your great presentation.